In September of 1851, a Memphis trader named Josiah Harwood made an announcement that shattered every rule of the Southern slave market. He claimed he was offering a man so beautiful, so unervingly perfect, that 12 plantation owners had already collapsed upon seeing him, 3 of whom required physicians to revive them. Witnesses said the man possessed a face not meant for this world, eyes that stopped conversation mid-air, and a calm that felt almost divine. But that was not the shocking part. Harwood demanded an impossible price, $14,000, a sum unheard of for any enslaved man. He swore the buyer would understand why after looking upon him for just 10 seconds. The auction house filled beyond capacity. Men shoved, cursed, climbed on furniture. A priest fainted. A doctor dropped his stethoscope. No one had ever seen chaos like that inside a Memphis trading floor. The white society of Memphis was scandalized. But they had no idea what the real truth was. By November, the man known only as Lucien would vanish without a trace. 7 men would die, 19 more would lose their minds, and a burned journal, found buried beneath a collapsed stable, would contain a single chilling sentence. No human beauty should exist in the shape of a curse. What really happened inside that Memphis slave market? What did Lucien do that terrified every man who witnessed him? Before we uncover the disturbing truth, subscribe, hit that bell, and comment your state below. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. In the late summer heat of Memphis, 1851, the city breathed like a restless animal, hot, damp, and swollen with the weight of ambition. Cotton season was tightening its grip on the riverbanks, and flatboats drifted down the Mississippi like pale ghosts carrying fortunes on their backs. The streets around Adams Avenue rose in waves of dust as wagons rolled past the brick storefronts, each wheel turning through a commerce built on 2 things: the land and the bodies forced to work it. Memphis was young but already cruel, already proud, already dangerous. Men boasted that no city west of the Appalachians moved money as quickly. They never said the quieter truth, that behind every banknote was a human being whose scream had been swallowed by the river. The trading yards behind Josiah Harwood's office were the epicenter of that truth. Pens built of cypress wood, stained by years of sweat and rain, held dozens of men and women who waited in lines that stretched like shadows across the dirt. Harwood had designed the place to resemble a livestock center. No softer metaphor would have satisfied him. Bells rang when buyers arrived. Overseers barked instructions. The smell of fear mixed with the smell of river mud, creating an odor that clung to the clothes of anyone who stepped inside. One visitor once said the place smelled like God had abandoned it long ago. She was not entirely wrong. Harwood himself stood on the balcony overlooking the pens, tall and sharp, his sunburned jaw set like he was preparing for war. He was not the wealthiest trader in Tennessee, but he was the most relentless. People whispered that he had been born with an instinct for cruelty, as if something in the earth had shaped him wrong. Plantation owners trusted him because he could look at a man for 3 seconds and calculate his lifetime value. He did not drink, he did not gamble, and he did not believe in mercy. In Memphis, those traits made him respected. But in recent days, something had shifted in him. He walked faster, spoke less, slept even less. He had reorganized the schedule, canceled public auctions, snapped at overseers for minor mistakes. Twice he fired a man outright. Some believed he had found a new source of profit. Others suspected madness. What none of them knew was that Harwood was guarding a secret, one he believed would double his fortune, rewrite his reputation, and turn every eye in the South toward his name. Rumors had begun to spread like sparks on dry cotton. They said Harwood had traveled to Louisiana earlier that month for a private sale, an estate collapse involving a bankrupt family whose name the newspapers refused to print. They said he had returned with something beyond explanation. Some claimed it was a skilled fighter, stronger than any man Memphis had ever seen. Others whispered it was a boy with perfect musical pitch, able to imitate any voice. Someone even swore Harwood had brought back a foreign prince chained in gold shackles. No one guessed the truth, not yet. On the morning of August 29th, Memphis awoke to a strange stillness across the trading block. Harwood ordered the pens cleared, the halls swept, and the auction floor polished. A river wind carried in the scent of hot iron from the blacksmith's shop, and the sun glared off the wooden planks with a brightness that made people squint as they approached the yard. Buyers arrived early, expecting a sale, but the gates remained closed. No announcements were posted. The silence confused everyone. Harwood plotting something, a man muttered as he wiped sweat from his brow. Nothing good ever follows. Memphis thrived on spectacle, yet that day even the street preachers paused their shouting as if they sensed a storm rumbling under the soil. A group of enslaved men stood chained near the entrance, whispering anxiously. One of them, older and deliberate in his words, leaned toward another and said, "Ain't right the way the air feel. Like a thing is coming that the Lord himself don't want to witness." He was closer to the truth than any free man in the city. Inside the main office, Harwood stood alone before the mirror, adjusting his cravat with hands that trembled, though he refused to admit it. The thing he had brought back from Louisiana, the man named Lucien, was resting behind a locked door only he possessed the key for. Harwood had looked upon Lucien 3 times since returning. Each time he left the room sweating, shaken, and yet exhilarated, as if he had glimpsed some forbidden marvel. He had seen men break under fear, under pain, under labor. But never under beauty. Not until Lucien. That beauty was the reason everything felt strange in Memphis. Birds avoided the trading block. Dogs barked at empty corners. Even the river seems to ripple oddly when Lucien walked past the windows. Harwood planned to unveil him soon, very soon, but he needed the right moment, the right audience, the right tension in the air. He needed the city to hunger for a sight they could not comprehend. What he did not know was that the hunger would consume more than he ever intended. By the time the doors finally opened, 100 eyes waited, restless, breathless, desperate to see what Harwood had brought home. None of them understood that Memphis was about to witness something that would haunt its history forever. Lucien arrived in Memphis under a moonless sky, carried inside a weather-beaten wagon whose wheels creaked like bones snapping with every turn. Josiah Harwood had insisted on traveling at night, refusing lanterns, refusing conversation, refusing even to let the driver whistle. The fewer eyes on the road, the better. The fewer questions asked, the safer his prize would remain. For 3 nights they moved through back roads, swamps, and river crossings, the darkness protecting them like a cloak. And through it all, Lucien sat silently in the back of the wagon, unchained, unmoving, his hands resting loosely on his knees. Harwood didn't bother chaining him. It wasn't necessary. Something about Lucien made even escape feel irrelevant, as if the world outside could offer him no refuge, no freedom he believed in. He sat with the posture of a carved religious figure, still, elegant, haunting. The dim glow of moonlight would occasionally reveal the sharp line of his cheek, the long eyelashes, the gentle curve of his mouth. Harwood stole glances every hour. Each time, a cold unease slid along his spine. Beauty like that didn't make sense in a world like this. It felt sculpted rather than born, biblical rather than human. By the time the wagon rolled into Memphis, Harwood had already rehearsed the introduction a dozen times. He will sell for more than any man in the South. He will make them kneel. They will empty their vaults for him. But beneath his ambition lay another emotion, one he would never confess: fear. The first person to see Lucien in Memphis was Rayford, the night guard. A man built like an oak stump, too broad for his uniform, too stubborn to show fear even when wise to. When Harwood knocked 3 times on the yard gate, Rayford swung it open with irritation already carved into his face. "You best have reason for waking me at?" He stopped. His eyes drifted past Harwood toward the shadowy figure climbing down from the wagon. Lucien stepped onto the dirt with a slow, deliberate grace, bare feet touching earth, shoulders rising with a quiet breath. His hair fell past his jaw in loose dark waves, barely disturbed by the movement. Even in the poor light, his skin seemed to catch the faintest glow of the street lamps, as though gathering whatever light the world had left. Rayford lowered the rifle he'd been holding casually. "What, in God's name?" Harwood shoved past him, his voice sharper than intended. "Do not look too long." Rayford blinked but obeyed. Something in Lucien's presence demanded caution, not by threat, but by some invisible tension humming beneath the skin. Harwood marched Lucien toward the inner holding house, unlocking the reinforced door he'd ordered installed 2 days before even retrieving him. The smell of cedar and oil lanterns filled the room. The walls were polished, the air still, the windows barred. Harwood wanted this place to feel like a treasure vault, because that was how he saw Lucien, a living treasure, impossible to appraise. "Sit." Lucien obeyed. Not a word, not a question, not the faintest flicker of resistance. Harwood circled him slowly, inspecting him not like a man, but like a rare artifact. Lucien's posture was perfect even in silence, his back straight, his chin lifted slightly, his hands folded with an elegance that didn't seem learned. It felt instinctive like nobility. But it wasn't just his beauty that unsettled Harwood. It was the effect of it. Even a second glance made the room feel smaller, the air heavier. A strange pressure built behind the eyes, like standing too close to a burning furnace. Harwood stepped away, breath shaking. "What did they do to you in Louisiana?" he whispered. Lucien didn't blink. Harwood tried again, louder this time. Speak. Lucien's eyes remained steady, dark and deep, holding a kind of sorrow so monumental it felt older than the man himself. His mouth didn't open. No breath to shape a word came forth. Silence. Harwood clenched his jaw. You will speak when commanded. Lucien lowered his eyes, not in fear, not in submission, but in something else. Acceptance. As if he had already surrendered all language the world could offer him. Harwood felt anger prickle under his skin, but it was quickly swallowed by desire. Not the kind he would ever dare entertain aloud. This was the desire for possession, for mastery, for owning something no other man had ever touched. Something perfect. He leaned in close, inspecting Lucien's features one by one. The symmetrical brows, the straight nose, the sculpted lips that seemed too soft for a place like Memphis. He reached out, hesitating just a moment before brushing his fingers against Lucien's jaw. Lucien flinched. Not visibly. Not with a jerk. But Harwood felt it, a subtle tightening of the muscles beneath the skin, a warning so faint he almost missed it. Do not pretend you are above your station, Harwood whispered. Lucien's gaze lifted. And in those dark eyes, Harwood saw not defiance, not rebellion, but an unbearable sadness, the kind that made even cruelty hesitate. Harwood stepped back. Whatever the Louisiana family had kept hidden, whatever they had endured around this man, whatever tragedies he carried inside him, it was real. It pulsed in the air like a heartbeat. Harwood didn't want the sadness. He wanted the beauty. The sadness made him angry because it made him feel small. He turned toward the door, locking it with a metallic snap. No one sees him until I say so, he muttered to himself. And when they do, they will pay anything. Outside, the Mississippi wind whistled through the alleys, uneasy, as if carrying a warning Memphis was too proud to hear. Lucien's arrival was not the beginning of profit. It was the beginning of disaster. The first death connected to Lucien happened less than 48 hours after his arrival, though at the time no one had the courage to link the two events. Memphis was a city that believed in omens but refused to speak them aloud. Men who gambled on slave auctions, riverboats, and cotton futures dismissed superstitions as foolish talk. Yet the moment Josiah Harwood announced private viewings, limited to only the wealthiest buyers, half the city felt a shiver run beneath the heat. The chosen group arrived on a humid morning thick with the scent of magnolia rot. 7 men stepped into Harwood's office, all draped in fine linen suits despite the choking weather. Their boots tracked dust across the polished floorboards. They spoke in clipped whispers, discussing profits, drought forecasts, and rival plantations. But every now and then, one of them went silent and cast a glance toward the locked inner door that held the thing they were paying to witness. Harwood stood before them with the sly confidence of a man unveiling a miracle. His eyes never rested. They flicked across faces, searching for weakness, anticipation, desperation. You will not speak of what you see today outside this building, Harwood said. This is not an auction. This is an invitation. One man chuckled nervously. Invitation to what, Josiah? Judgment Day? Harwood's lips twitched. Something finer. He unlocked the door. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The smell of cedar slipped into the hallway, followed by a faint chill that didn't belong to the August heat. When Harwood gestured for them to enter, they stepped forward slowly, like men approaching the altar of a church they didn't trust. Lucien was sitting on the wooden bench exactly where Harwood had left him, his posture straight, his hands folded neatly. A narrow shaft of morning light fell across his face, revealing the contours that had already begun generating whispers across the trading district. Cheekbones sculpted like marble, skin smooth as river stone, and eyes that shimmered with a depth that made men hesitate. The buyers froze. All conversation ended. No coughs, no shifting boots, no throat clearing. Only the sound of Lucien's quiet breath and the ticking of the brass clock above the doorway. One man, a wealthy cotton baron named Elias Crawford, stepped forward first. He had the reputation of being hard to impress. He'd once returned a purchased slave because the man's walk lacked elegance. Yet now, his usually cold face softened into something close to awe. Merciful heaven, Crawford whispered. Harwood nodded slightly. You understand the price now. But Crawford didn't respond. His gaze remained locked on Lucien, pupils dilating, breath shortening. It was as if he had been struck by something invisible. A thin sheen of sweat appeared along his hairline. He took another step forward, then another. Lucien didn't move. He didn't blink. His expression remained calm, almost serene, but his stillness carried an edge, like the surface of deep water, hiding currents strong enough to pull a man under. Crawford reached out a trembling hand. Do not touch him. Harwood's voice cracked like a whip. Crawford froze midair. His fingers hovered inches from Lucien's shoulder. In that single suspended moment, Lucien lifted his eyes toward the man. Not with hostility, not with fear, but with something quieter and far more devastating, an unbearable sorrow that felt like the weight of 1,000 buried tragedies. Crawford's knees buckled. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed to the floor, striking the wooden boards with a thud that echoed through the chamber. For 3 seconds no one reacted. Then chaos erupted. Get a doctor. Is he breathing? Lord above, what happened? Harwood pushed through the crowd, kneeling beside Crawford. The man's chest twitched weakly, struggling for breath. His skin had turned pale, his lips blue. Harwood shouted for Rayford, who sprinted toward the street to find the nearest physician. Behind them, Lucien lowered his gaze again, his expression unchanged. It was impossible to tell whether he felt guilt, fear, or nothing at all. When the doctor arrived, a short, stern-faced man named Dr. Whitlock, he knelt beside Crawford and placed 2 fingers at the man's throat. Heart shock, Whitlock muttered. Unusual presentation. Did he ingest anything? What? Whiskey? No, Harwood snapped. He fainted. The doctor examined Crawford's eyes, pried open his jaw, checked the pulse again. His frown deepened. This is extraordinary. I have never seen a reaction this abrupt. Whitlock glanced up, and his gaze accidentally fell on Lucien. He stiffened. For a moment, his face softened, just as Crawford's had. Then he blinked rapidly and tore his eyes away as if resisting some magnetic force he couldn't explain. Harwood noticed. Everyone noticed. Whitlock stood quickly. Get him outside. No. He needs air. Cold compresses. Fast. The men carried Crawford toward the yard, their boots clattering across the floor as panic tightened their voices. Even once the room emptied, the tension remained behind like a presence. Heavy, watchful. Harwood turned slowly toward Lucien. You did something, he whispered. Something I did not see. Lucien did not respond. Harwood stared at him as if trying to pierce through the silence, through the beauty, through the stillness that felt more dangerous than any knife. His hands trembled slightly. He clenched them into fists. I will control this, he muttered. No matter what you are. Outside, Crawford gasped for air like a drowning man. Inside, Lucien remained still as stone. What Harwood did not know, what no one in Memphis knew, was that Crawford's collapse was only the beginning. By the end of the season, 6 more men would fall. And none of them would rise again. The only person in Memphis who noticed the deeper pattern forming around Lucien was Eliza Harwood, Josiah's estranged sister, though most people in the city had forgotten she existed at all. She lived in an upstairs room above her brother's office, a narrow space filled with dust-covered books, dried ink bottles, and journals stacked so high they formed crooked towers along the walls. Eliza had been educated in Philadelphia before their father's death dragged her back south, and she kept habits Memphis considered unnecessary for a woman: meticulous note-taking, obsessive observation, and a distrust of everything her brother claimed to understand. Most days, no one saw her moving between the rooms except for a few enslaved house servants who whispered that Miss Eliza rarely slept, rarely ate, and rarely blinked, like she was watching the world too closely. They weren't far from the truth. Eliza had learned long ago that the only way to survive under her brother's roof was to become invisible, and she had mastered invisibility to an art. But Lucien shattered that discipline the first time she saw him. It was late afternoon when she descended the staircase to refill her lamp oil. She had heard raised voices, boots slamming, a man being dragged out to the street. Curious, she paused at the base of the stairs, where a sliver of sunlight illuminated the dust in the air. Through the open door of her brother's private office, she saw Lucien sitting on the wooden bench, the very spot where Crawford had collapsed that morning. He sat still, so still she thought him carved, hands folded, spine straight, head bowed slightly as if listening to something the rest of the world could not hear. The glow of a nearby lantern touched the edges of his face, casting a soft radiance that made the shadows around him deepen, as though the room were bending to accommodate him. Eliza forgot the lamp oil entirely. Her breath stilled. Not because he was handsome, though he was in a way she had no words for, but because something inside her shifted the instant she saw him. Attention, a recognition, a warning. It was as if his presence disturbed the very air, like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples reached her bones. No man should look like that, she thought. Not in this world. Not in this place. Before she realized she was moving, she stepped quietly into the room. Lucien looked up. And in the half-second when their eyes met, something passed between them. something so subtle, so immediate, so heavy that Eliza felt her balance falter. It wasn't desire. It wasn't admiration. It was knowing. He sees me, she realized. He sees everything. Lucien's gaze did not linger. He lowered his eyes again, but Eliza had already understood more in that brief moment than her brother had in days. She approached slowly, careful not to startle him, careful not to provoke her brother's wrath. A quiet tremor raced through her fingers as she reached for the journal tucked into her apron pocket. "Do you speak?" she whispered. Lucien did not respond. She waited. Still nothing. But the silence did not feel like refusal. It felt like grief, heavy, patient, drowning. "You are hurt," she said, though she saw no wounds. Not on the outside, but deeper. Lucien's hands tightened faintly, the first visible change in his posture. That was all the confirmation she needed. Behind her, footsteps thundered down the hallway. She shut her journal quickly and stepped back just as Harwood stormed in. "What are you doing here?" he barked. Eliza did not flinch. "I heard shouting." "That is no concern of yours." "He is sitting in your office, Josiah." "That is everyone's concern." Harwood's eyes flashed. "You will not address him. You will not approach him. You will not stand in this room again without my permission. Do you understand?" Eliza held his gaze. "He is a man, not a relic." "He is property," Harwood snapped. "And valuable property at that." Lucien remained still, but the faintest shadow crossed his expression at the word property. Eliza saw it. Harwood did not. "You brought something into this house," she said softly, "and you do not understand it." Harwood laughed, though the sound came out thin. "Understand him? I understand profit. That is all that matters." Eliza glanced back at Lucien one more time. His eyes were lowered again, but she could feel the weight of his thoughts pressing like a tide against the walls. "Profit has a habit of blinding men," she murmured. Harwood grabbed her arm roughly, pushing her toward the doorway. "Leave this room." She left, but not before noticing a small detail, a detail her brother missed entirely. Lucien's hands had begun trembling. Not from fear. From restraint. Harwood slammed the door behind her. But Eliza's mind was already racing. She returned to her small upstairs room, sat at her desk, opened her journal, dipped her pen in ink and wrote one line. "There is something wrong with Josiah's new prize, something beautiful and something terrifying." It was the first sentence in a record that would one day damn her brother and save Lucien's life. What she did not know was that Lucien felt her presence like a distant warmth, the first kindness he had encountered in years. And that single moment of recognition would eventually bring Memphis to its knees. By the second week of September, the story of Josiah Harwood's impossible man had woven itself through Memphis like smoke. Men repeated the tale in barbershops, on steamboats, in parlors thick with pipe smoke. A man too beautiful to be real. A man whose face made Elias Crawford collapse to the floor like he'd been struck by lightning. Some laughed it off as exaggeration. Others crossed themselves in secret. But no one dismissed it entirely. Harwood understood better than most that rumors were a currency. He fed them. He met with a handful of select planters privately, dropping the same line with careful precision each time. "I will host one more viewing. One night only. A closed auction. No newspapers. No clerks. Just men who can afford to reshape their fortunes." They always asked the same question. "Is he truly as extraordinary as they say?" Harwood's answer never changed. "You will not be able to look away." So the night was chosen. A moonless Saturday, when the riverfront would be quiet, when the streets around the trading yard would be mostly empty. Harwood ordered extra lamps, polished the main auction hall, and instructed his men to remove anything that might distract from the central spectacle. The platform was scrubbed, the benches arranged in tight semicircles, leaving every buyer close to the stage where Lucien would stand. He refused to admit, even to himself, that he wasn't just preparing to sell a man. He was staging a ritual. By late afternoon, the heat began to break. A thin wind rolled in from the river, carrying the sound of creaking docks and distant laughter from sailors who knew nothing of what was about to transpire. Memphis buildings cast long shadows across the cobblestones as the sun sank low, turning glass windows into molten sheets of gold. In her upstairs room, Eliza Harwood watched the preparations with clenched fists. She saw the extra guards take their positions. She saw the lanterns being tested in the courtyard, their flames dancing nervously in the rising breeze. She saw her brother pacing the length of the hall, counting seats, muttering odds, imagining bids. Eliza opened her journal and wrote, "He is going to auction the man tonight. The city will not leave this building unchanged. She hesitated, then added, if I can do nothing else, I will bear witness. As the sky darkened, the chosen guests began to arrive. Carriages pulled up to the yard in a procession that looked more like a funeral convoy than a social gathering. Men stepped out wrapped in black coats despite the lingering humidity, their faces set with the hungry look of gamblers who believed God favored them. Some had traveled from Mississippi, others from Arkansas, even a pair from as far as Georgia. Men who had heard whispers of Lucien and decided the journey was worth the risk. Inside the hall, the air grew thick with cigar smoke and male laughter that had too much edge to it. Harwood greeted each man by name, his voice smooth, his eyes calculating. Tonight, gentlemen, he said, you will witness an asset unlike any other. You will leave this place altered by what you have seen. Altered how? One planter joked. My pockets lighter? Harwood smiled. Your imagination expanded. Along the back wall, enslaved servants moved quietly with trays of whiskey and water, careful not to make eye contact, careful not to draw attention. Among them, a young boy named Asa stole quick glances toward the hallway leading to the secure chamber where Lucien waited. Asa had seen him once earlier that day, when he'd been sent to deliver a basin of water. Lucien had thanked him with a nod. No words. No smile. Just a nod that made Asa feel, for the first time in his life, that someone truly saw him. Now, as the clock in the hallway struck 11, the murmur of voices in the hall settled into a tense hush. Boots shifted. Chairs creaked. Where is he, Josiah? A buyer called. You've made us wait long enough. Harwood checked his pocket watch and snapped it closed with a metallic click. All in due time. The more impatient you are, the higher the bids will climb. He motioned to Rayford. Bring him. The guard nodded and disappeared down the corridor. In the locked chamber, Lucien sat in the familiar posture on the bench, hands folded, head bowed. The only light came from a single lantern hanging on the far wall, casting a warm glow that softened his features into something almost unearthly. Shadows formed shallow hollows under his eyes, making the sorrow there look bottomless. Rayford unlocked the door and stepped inside. You ready? He asked, though he did not know why he bothered. Lucien never answered. Lucien lifted his gaze, meeting the guard's eyes. For a moment, Rayford felt the same strange pressure others had described. A tightening in his chest, a quietness in his thoughts, as if the world had narrowed to just two people in that room. He cleared his throat and looked away quickly. Stand up. Lucien obeyed. Rayford shackled his wrists loosely, more for show than necessity. Harwood had insisted on chains. It made the buyers feel safer, as if iron could contain whatever it was they were really afraid of. As they walked down the hallway toward the main hall, Eliza stepped silently into the shadows near the stairwell. The hem of her dress brushed the floor as she pressed herself against the wall, invisible behind a curtain of darkness. Lucien passed within 3 feet of her. He did not turn his head. But she felt it, the same internal shift as before, that subtle awareness. As if some part of him recognized her presence even without seeing her. She whispered under her breath, so softly Rayford didn't hear, so softly it might have been a prayer. Forgive us. Lucien's fingers tightened around the chain for a fraction of a second. Then he was gone, swallowed by the light spilling from the hall. When he stepped onto the platform, the room fell silent in a way no whip, no gunshot, no shouted command could have achieved. Conversations died mid-sentence. Fingers relaxed around glass rims. Hearts forgot to beat for a single terrible moment. Lucien stood calmly, shoulders back, eyes lowered. Every line of his body seemed crafted for the stage. Perfect posture, perfect stillness, perfect beauty. The lamplight kissed his skin, tracing the curve of his jaw, the column of his throat, the broad line of his shoulders. The men staring up at him were not thinking of labor, of field strength, of market value. For the first time in their lives, they were confronting beauty as something dangerous. Harwood saw it. He saw the way their faces shifted, from skepticism to astonishment to deep, unsettling hunger. He spread his arms like a conductor preparing an orchestra. Gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying through the hall, I present to you the rarest man in the South. Keep your eyes on him. Do not look away. 10 seconds and you will understand the price. To his left, a planter whispered hoarsely, he does not look real. To his right, another murmured, is that fear I feel? At the back of the room, Asa watched with wide eyes, trying to stay out of sight. Eliza watched too, from the shadows of the balcony above, clutching the wooden railing so hard her knuckles whitened. Down on the platform, Harwood stepped closer to Lucien. Speak, he commanded softly, though everyone in the room heard. Lucien remained silent. I said speak, Harwood repeated louder this time. Tell them your name. It would have been so simple. 2 syllables. 1 exhale of breath. But Lucien's lips did not move. His silence stretched out over the room like a cloth being pulled over a body. A flicker of irritation crossed Harwood's face. You will not shame me tonight, he hissed under his breath. Say something. Lucien lifted his head. His eyes rose slowly, taking in the sea of faces before him, greedy, fearful, enthralled. His gaze passed over each man as if weighing him, measuring him, finding him wanting. Several shifted uncomfortably under that quiet scrutiny. One swallowed hard enough for the man beside him to hear. Lucien inhaled. For the first time in years he felt the shape of words form on his tongue. The hall seemed to lean closer. Then everything changed. A gust of wind roared down the chimney, slamming into the lantern nearest the stage. The flames sputtered wildly. And then the lights went out. For one suspended moment, darkness swallowed the auction hall whole, thick, sudden, absolute. The men who moments earlier had been leaning forward in rapt attention now stood frozen, disoriented by the abrupt plunge into blackness. Someone inhaled sharply. Another cursed under his breath. The wooden benches creaked as bodies shifted anxiously. Then from somewhere near the stage, a voice broke the stillness. Who did that? It came out strained, pitched higher than intended. Fear had already begun digging its teeth into the room. A chair tipped and fell with a crash. Boots scraped the floor. The thunder of panicked breaths filled the air. No one could see anything. Not the man beside him. Not the guards. Not Lucien. Eliza, watching from the balcony above, felt her pulse slam against her ribs. She could see nothing, but she heard everything. The rising panic, the frantic movements, the unmistakable tremor of men who had just stared into something they did not understand and were now being forced to face it again, blind. Stay where you are. Harwood bellowed from somewhere near the platform. But the command had no spine. The darkness swallowed authority too. A sudden scream tore through the room. Someone had fallen. The sound, flesh striking wood, bones meeting an edge, sent a shiver racing across every man present. Boots thundered as several stumbled backward, colliding with benches and each other. Light, a buyer shouted. For God's sake, light something. But the hall remained a smothered void. The wind outside howled through the chimney again, an eerie reminder that something beyond human intention was moving through this night. Then came the second scream, sharper, jagged, wet. A man gasped violently as if the air had been punched from his lungs. His body thudded down the small staircase leading to the platform. The cracking of bone echoed like a gunshot. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. No. Rayford and 2 guards rushed blindly toward the sound, but their boots skidded on something slick. One of them slipped, grunted, and regained balance only by grabbing the iron railing. What is that? Another shouted. Blood. The darkness answered with silence. Eliza strained her eyes, but she saw only shifting shadows. Her heart hammered so loudly she thought the men below might hear it. Somewhere within the blackout, Lucien remained. Still. Afraid? Trapped? She didn't know. A single faint glow flickered near the back of the room. Someone had managed to spark a flame on the edge of a match. The weak, trembling light illuminating a man with a gash across his forehead, eyes wide and glassy. The flame barely lasted a heartbeat before dying again, plunging them once more into suffocating black. Help, help him, a man cried out. But no one moved forward. They all felt it, an unspoken terror blooming in their throats. Something was happening in this darkness, and none dared be the one to step into its jaws. Then, unexpectedly, a calm voice cut through the panic. Stand back. It wasn't Harwood. It wasn't one of the guards. It was Lucien. His voice, after years of silence, was low, smooth but resonant, like water running over polished stone. It filled the dark with a strange quiet authority. Every man froze. The silence that followed felt alive. Harwood's breathing turned ragged. Lucien, what did you wear? But the sound of chains sliding across the wooden platform answered him. Lucien was moving. A faint metallic ring echoed as he stepped down the first stair. Light, Lucien said softly. The word wasn't a command. It was a warning. Moments later, as if the wind had exhausted its rage, the lantern nearest the stage sputtered back to life. Its flame flared weakly, casting a trembling glow across the platform and revealing the scene the darkness had hidden. A man lay twisted at the bottom of the stairs, one arm bent backward, head at an unnatural angle. His eyes, wide open, stared at nothing. He was dead. His temple was split where he had struck the corner of the stair. His hand was reaching toward the stage, toward Lucien. Gasps rippled across the hall. Several men backed away as if the corpse itself might rise. Harwood stumbled forward, horror twisting his features. No, he tripped, he must have tripped. Lucien was shackled, he couldn't. But the men were no longer listening. Their eyes were on Lucien. He stood at the edge of the platform, illuminated softly by the lantern's glow. His face was expressionless, but his posture had changed. His shoulders were lifted slightly, tension coiling beneath his calm exterior. His breathing was steady, too steady for a man surrounded by panic. Some part of him seemed larger in the half-light, more present, more dangerous. Eliza watched from above, her body trembling with a mix of awe and fear. She had never heard his voice before. She had never imagined it would sound like that, like a blade wrapped in velvet. One planter whispered, "He killed him." Another answered immediately, "Killed him how?" "He barely moved." A third muttered, "That man was reaching for him. I saw it. He was reaching to touch him." "Why?" Harwood spun toward them, desperation coloring his tone. "This is a tragedy, yes, but accidents happen. He fell. That is all. Lucien had nothing to do with this." But even Harwood didn't believe his own words. The darkness, the screams, the unexplainable fear that had gripped the room, it all pointed toward the same truth he refused to face. Lucien turned his face toward Harwood. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Harwood felt it, the same crushing weight Crawford had felt, the same silent pull that made grown men lose their breath. It hit him like a wave, cold and disorienting. Harwood looked away quickly. Lucien lowered his gaze again, the chains around his wrists glinting faintly in the lantern light. Across the hall, a plantation owner whispered, "This man is not natural." It was the first time someone dared speak aloud what had already rooted itself in every man's mind. But it would not be the last. Long before Lucien stood on Harwood's auction platform, long before Memphis whispered his name with fear and reverence, he had lived a life that should never have been written on any man, enslaved or free. His past was not made of years but of tragedies, layered like sediment beneath the surface of his quiet gaze. The men in Memphis saw only the final sculpture. None of them understood the chiseling that had carved him into what he was. Lucien had been born on a Louisiana estate called Maison du Chien, 40 miles upriver from New Orleans. The plantation was known for its manicured gardens, its marble floors, and the cruelty of its mistress, Madame Séraphine Delacroix, a woman whose vanity was so legendary that even her servants whispered it like a warning. Séraphine had an eye for beauty. She collected it the way other women collected jewels. And when Lucien was born, his mother a quiet house servant named Marianne, his father unknown, Séraphine saw in the newborn something luminous, something extraordinary. From the moment Marianne placed him in her arms, the mistress claimed him. No negotiation. No mercy. "He belongs to this house," Séraphine declared, her voice trembling with a feverish joy. "And this house alone." Marianne's heart cracked that day, though she would never show it. She raised Lucien with tenderness, knowing every softness she gave him would one day be weaponized against him. When Lucien turned 7, Séraphine began grooming him the way she groomed her porcelain dolls. She taught him posture, silence, stillness. He learned early that movement provoked attention, attention provoked punishment. So he learned not to move. By 10, his beauty had become notorious among guests. Women gasped softly when he entered rooms. Men stared too long. Some demanded explanations. Séraphine merely smiled as if she had personally sculpted him from marble. Lucien, meanwhile, grew increasingly quiet. The house swallowed his childhood piece by piece. Every compliment from a guest cut him like a blade. He learned that admiration was merely a slower form of violence. When he was 12, the first man died. It happened in the summer, thick with heat and cicadas. A visiting sugar baron, drunk, arrogant, cornered Lucien beneath the shade of the gallery and reached out to touch his face. Lucien froze the way Marianne had taught him. "Do not move. Stillness protects you." But something in the baron's expression shifted. Desire curdled into jealousy, as if he resented the boy simply for existing. He stepped closer, muttering something about unnatural beauty. Then his foot caught the edge of a loose stone. He stumbled, fell backward down the gallery steps, and cracked his skull open on the courtyard tiles. The sound of it, sharp, hollow, never left Lucien. The guests insisted it was an accident. Séraphine insisted nothing supernatural had occurred. But from that day forward, whenever Lucien entered a room, every man shifted instinctively, as if afraid to stand too close to him. Marianne held him tightly that night, whispering prayers against curses, against envy, against destruction. Lucien did not cry. He simply rested his head against her chest and listened to the frantic beat of her heart, wishing he could silence it, wishing his existence didn't cause it. At 14, the second death followed. This one was not accidental. Two cousins of the Delacroix family visited the estate, both known for their violent tempers. One evening, drunk on wine and rivalry, they began arguing over who Seraphine favored more. Their voices rose, echoing through the hallways. Lucien happened to walk past the doorway. The men fell silent when they saw him, silent in the way predators grow silent when fixated on prey. One said, "He's too perfect." The other spat, "No man should look like that." Within minutes, their argument turned to blows. A bottle shattered. A blade flashed. By the time servants intervened, one cousin lay bleeding on the floor, the other pinned beneath him, his throat torn open. Seraphine blamed family madness, but the servants whispered that Lucien's presence had ignited something dark inside the men, jealousy, desire, hatred, all twisted together. Lucien blamed himself. And from that night on, he stopped speaking altogether. Marianne tried to coax words from him. She knelt before him, cupping his face. "My love, silence is not protection. Your voice is yours. It is the one thing they cannot take." But he looked past her, through her, into a distance she could not reach. His silence consumed him. When he turned 16, tragedy struck again, this time beyond repair. Marianne fell ill. Too many years of exhaustion, too many sleepless nights praying her son would survive his own beauty. She died in the spring, her last breath leaving Lucien with a weight no boy should ever carry. In her final moments, she touched his cheek and whispered, "Do not let them shape you into their reflection. You are not theirs." Lucien held her hand long after her body grew cold. When Seraphine found him, his face was expressionless. But inside, something had broken in a way that could never be mended. He did not fight when Seraphine moved him from the servants' quarters into her own parlor, displaying him like a trophy. He did not fight when visitors inspected him like art. He did not fight when the estate's overseer, fueled by resentment and whiskey, cornered him with threats. He simply fell deeper into silence. A silence that protected him. A silence that destroyed others. The night Seraphine's estate fell into bankruptcy, ruined by debts, scandals, and whispers, Lucien watched the only world he'd ever known collapse. Harwood rode onto the property like a vulture picking over a carcass. He saw Lucien. And the hunger in his eyes told Lucien everything he needed to know. He was not escaping one cage. He was entering another. What Harwood did not know, what no one in Memphis could have imagined, was that Lucien's silence was not merely a choice. It was a shield. And soon it would become a weapon. Eliza Harwood did not plan to save Lucien. Not at first. She simply wanted to understand him. Understand the tremor in his hands, the depth behind his eyes, the impossible weight he carried in silence. But understanding, once given shape, becomes something else. Something dangerous. Something like purpose. She began noticing details her brother missed. How Lucien avoided sudden movement not out of fear but caution. Like a man aware that any shift in his presence could fracture the world around him. How servants relaxed near him, as if his silence soothed rather than threatened. How every man who tried to claim ownership over him reacted with jealousy, obsession, or something closer to madness. Beauty is a power, Eliza wrote, but his is a burden, and one men do not know how to bear. The decision to save him came the night after the deadly blackout. Memphis had already heard whispers of the second death. Some claimed the man had died of fright. Others said he had seen something in the dark he could not speak of. Harwood locked his office door that night and drank until dawn. Eliza did not sleep. She sat at her desk, her lamp flickering, rereading the pages she'd written about Lucien. With each sentence, her heart tightened. The city would destroy him. Harwood would sell him to the highest bidder, a man who would treat him as a possession, a prize, a curse to be tamed. That fate was inevitable, unless she intervened. By sunrise, she knew what she had to do. But she also knew she couldn't do it alone. There were two enslaved men on Harwood's estate who had quietly worked under him for years, brothers named Jonah and Caleb, men respected among the servants and feared by the overseers for their unbreakable loyalty to one another. They were strong, discreet, and deeply distrustful of Harwood. Eliza found them behind the stables, repairing a broken gate. The morning fog curled around their boots as she approached. Jonah straightened. "Miss Eliza," he said cautiously, "you should not be out here." "I need your help," she whispered. Caleb exchanged a wary glance with his brother. "Help with what?" Eliza hesitated. Her hands trembled. She swallowed hard. Lucien. Jonah's jaw tightened. Caleb looked away. You saw what happened last night, Eliza continued. You heard the rumors. You know the danger he is in. Caleb exhaled sharply. Everyone near him ends up harmed. Or dead. Not because he intends it, Eliza said. Because men lose themselves around him. Jonah narrowed his eyes. Why are you telling us this? Because my brother will sell him, she whispered. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe sooner. And once Lucien leaves this place, no one will protect him. He will be alone. And the kind of men who can afford him? Her voice trailed off, but the meaning hung heavily in the air. Jonah wiped sweat from his brow. What do you expect us to do? Steal him? Run into the night? We'd be dead before the river bend. Not if we have help, Eliza said. What help? Caleb asked, suspicion sharp in his tone. Eliza took a deep breath. A riverboat arrives tonight. The captain owes me a debt, a large one. He knows the routes north. He knows where the patrols are weakest. He knows where the underground railroad begins. Jonah blinked. Why would a woman like you know a man like that? Eliza looked away. Because once, years ago, I tried to run too. Silence fell. The brothers stared at her with new understanding. Caleb spoke first. Why help him? Why risk everything? Eliza pressed a trembling hand against her journal. Because he should not die for the way he looks. Because the world has punished him for a gift he never asked for. Because, she paused, closing her eyes. Because when he looks at people, he sees their souls. And no one has ever looked at him as a man in return. Jonah lowered his voice. What exactly is your plan? She outlined it quickly. A midnight escape through the back corridor when Harwood and his buyers would be drunk or asleep, through the alley behind the stable yard, then to the river where the boat would be waiting under a smoke lantern. Timing had to be perfect. One misstep and everything would unravel. And Lucien? Caleb asked. Will he come willingly? Eliza swallowed. I do not know. But I will ask him myself tonight. Jonah sighed deeply, weighing the impossible risk. If we're caught, we die, Caleb finished grimly. Eliza met their eyes without wavering. If we do nothing, he dies too. Or worse. The brothers exchanged one final look. Jonah nodded slowly. We'll help, he said. But the moment anything feels wrong, we run. Understood. Eliza exhaled shakily. Understood. Before they could say more, the sound of boots approached. Eliza quickly stepped back, slipping her journal behind her skirt. Harwood appeared from around the stable wall, his face flushed, his eyes bloodshot. He eyed the three of them suspiciously. What are you doing out here? Repairing your gate, Caleb said calmly. Harwood grunted. Miss Eliza, come inside. I need a word. Her stomach twisted. As she followed him toward the house, she felt Jonah's and Caleb's eyes on her, filled with worry, fear, and a fragile thread of hope. Inside the dim hallway, Harwood closed the door behind them and leaned close. His breath smelled of whiskey. Eliza, he murmured, tomorrow night Lucien will be sold. Her pulse skipped. I have buyers coming from Nashville, Vicksburg, and Charleston. Men with real money. Men with influence. Men who appreciate rarity. Eliza felt the floor tilt under her feet. Harwood smiled, a thin, sinister curve. Soon I'll be rid of him. And that thing will never haunt this house again. He walked away without waiting for her response. Eliza remained frozen in the hallway. Her plan was no longer a choice. It was the only chance Lucien had. And she had less than 24 hours to save him. The following night, the auction hall did not feel like a place of business. It felt like a tinderbox soaked in oil, waiting, trembling, hungry for a spark. The air throbbed with anticipation so thick it clung to the skin like sweat. Men arrived dressed in their finest coats, their boots shined to a mirror gleam, their voices low and charged. They came not for labor, not for strength, not even for status. They came for legend. Harwood's invitations had worked. By midnight, the room was packed shoulder to shoulder. More than 40 men had squeezed inside, some sitting on the edges of tables, others standing along the walls. The lamps, glowing fiercely in clusters, gave the room an unnatural golden haze, as if it were suspended between night and fire. Eliza watched from the narrow balcony above, hidden behind a wooden column. Jonah and Caleb kept to the shadows near the exit, their muscles tense, their eyes darting between the doorway and the platform. They had memorized every route out of the building, every potential obstacle. But as the crowd grew larger, louder, more unpredictable, the risk sharpened. Harwood strutted onto the platform with the triumph of a man who believed the world itself had bowed to him. He spread his arms wide and let the murmuring quiet into expectant silence. "Gentlemen," he declared, "tonight you will witness what no other men in the South will ever see. The finest specimen of beauty the human race has produced. Worth more than gold. Worth more than diamonds. Worth whatever price you dare to imagine." Voices murmured in disbelief. A few men chuckled, but the sound lacked confidence. They had heard stories. They had seen reactions. Curiosity mixed with fear in equal measure. Harwood nodded to Rayford. "Bring him out." Rayford opened the side door. Lucien stepped into the hall. A strange hush fell, deeper than silence, heavier than awe. Every man in the room went still, as if held by invisible hands. Lucien walked with unhurried grace, his wrists bound loosely in iron cuffs that glinted under the lamps. His posture, straight yet soft, calm yet unyielding, commanded the room more effectively than any shouted proclamation. He did not look at the men directly. His eyes stayed lowered, lashes casting faint shadows on his cheeks. But even without meeting their gaze, Lucien bent the atmosphere around him. Breath shortened. Knuckles whitened. A tremor moved through the front row, a ripple of something deep and primal. Eliza's heart squeezed painfully. She whispered, "Lucien, hold on." Harwood gestured at the buyers. "Look upon him. Truly look." A planter near the stage stepped forward tentatively, like a man approaching a sleeping serpent. 10 seconds. That was all it took. His shoulders slumped. His jaw slackened. His eyes widened with something like wonder and terror. What is he?" the man whispered. Another man pushed closer. Then another. They crowded toward the platform, drawn to Lucien like moths to flame. Lucien finally lifted his gaze. Gasps cascaded across the hall. Men staggered back. Some gripped the benches for balance. One man whispered a prayer. Another whispered a curse. Harwood beamed. "You see? You feel it? He is beyond price." At the back of the hall, Jonah muttered, "Lord help us, they're losing their minds." Eliza's fingers dug into the wooden railing. She saw exactly what Jonah saw, the unraveling, the fraying composure, the instability creeping behind every man's eyes. Lucien had spent his life understanding what his presence did to fragile egos. And tonight, surrounded by greed and liquor, there were too many fragile egos in one room. A buyer stepped forward, breath shaking. "Name your price, Harwood. I will pay it." Another snapped, "I'll double whatever he offers." A third shoved them aside. "He's mine. I want him tonight." The shouting escalated, swelling like a rising storm. Rayford stepped forward to maintain order, but he was already too late. A planter lunged toward Lucien, hand outstretched. Whether to touch him, claim him, or strike him, none would ever know. Lucien instinctively stepped back. His chain caught the edge of a torch mounted to the side pillar. The torch wobbled. It fell. The oil spilled first, splattering across the wooden floorboards like a burst of dark rain. Then the flames followed. A hiss. A roar. A bright explosion of fire that raced across the varnished boards faster than any man could react. Screams shredded the air. Chaos erupted instantly. Men stumbled backward, knocking over benches. Another torch toppled. Someone pushed someone else, and the movement rippled violently through the crowd. Within seconds, the room transformed into a living inferno of smoke, panic, and bodies clawing for escape. Jonah shouted, "The exit." "Caleb, move." But the crush of men jammed the doorway. Harwood yelled orders no one heard, his voice lost beneath the roar of spreading flame. His elegant coat caught a spark. He slapped at it madly. Lucien remained still for a moment, watching the fire crawl across the floor like a living creature. Then he turned to Rayford. "Unlock me," he said. Rayford stared, frozen, not by fear of the fire, but by the shock of hearing Lucien speak again. "Rayford!" Eliza shouted from above. "Unlock him." That snapped him from his trance. He fumbled for the key with trembling hands, released Lucien's cuffs, and barely had time to step back before Lucien moved. He didn't run. He didn't panic. He walked straight into the thickening smoke, searching for the sound of crying. Two enslaved boys, stable hands, were trapped behind a fallen bench. Flames crept toward them like hungry fingers. They cowered, coughing violently. Lucien lifted the bench with one fluid motion, pulled the boys into his arms, and led them through a gap between the collapsing structure and the wall. "Come with me," Jonah yelled. Lucien shook his head. "Take them." Jonah grabbed the two boys. Caleb cleared a path. Eliza watched all of it, her breath tight, her chest aching with fear and awe. Lucien looked up at her. For the briefest moment, through smoke, ash, and rising flame, their eyes met again. Eliza whispered, "We're going to get you out." Lucien nodded once. Then the ceiling beam cracked. A massive plank fell, blocking the platform and sending fresh sparks into the air. Flames surged behind Lucien like a flaming curtain, cutting him off from Harwood, from the buyers, from most of the room. Harwood screamed, "He caused this. He's a demon. A demon beauty." No one listened. No one cared. They were too busy surviving. Lucien turned toward the smoke-filled side corridor, the only remaining path. And he ran. For the first time in years, he ran for his life. Smoke poured through the corridor like a living creature, curling, clawing, searching for breath to steal. The wooden walls groaned under the weight of flame and heat. Sparks rained from the ceiling, each one landing with a hiss against the floorboards. Lucien ran, the air slicing into his lungs like blades. Behind him, the auction hall roared with collapsing timber, panicked men, and screams swallowed before they fully formed. Ahead of him, a thin slit of cool night air glimmered like a promise. He pushed forward, but the smoke thickened. His lungs spasmed. His vision blurred. His hand dragged along the wall to steady himself. For a moment, he felt the old silence, the numbness that had held him for years, threatening to swallow him again. He forced himself to stay conscious, to move, to live. Footsteps thundered behind him. "Lucien." Jonah's voice cut through the smoke like a lifeline. "Keep moving." Jonah appeared beside him, soot streaking his face, coughing violently. Caleb followed, pulling one of the younger boys by the collar. Caleb grabbed Lucien's wrist. "This way. The back door." Lucien nodded, though his breath came in ragged wheezes. Every step burned. Every inhale tasted like ash. But he followed. They barreled toward the side exit, an old wooden door leading behind the stables. Firelight glowed through the cracks. The air outside carried the scent of horses, mud, and blessed cold wind. Jonah kicked the door. It didn't budge. He kicked again, grunting, sweat pouring down his temples. Caleb joined him. Together, they slammed their shoulders into the door until the wood finally splintered outward with a thunderous crack. Cool night air rushed in. Lucien stumbled into the open yard, gasping, his lungs screaming as they expanded with fresh oxygen. The night was alive with noise, shouting from the street, the crackle of fire behind them, distant bells. The flames climbing Harwood's building cast wild shadows onto the dirt, flickering like demons dancing on the walls. "Over here," a voice hissed from the darkness. "Eliza." She emerged from behind a stack of crates, clutching her journal against her chest, eyes wild with terror and purpose. "Lucien, come quickly." Lucien stared at her through the smoke and embers. Her face, lit by firelight, looked both desperate and resolute. For a moment he felt something strange, something like trust. "Miss Eliza," Jonah coughed. "The riverboat, did he come?" "Yes," she whispered, pointing toward the alley. "He's waiting. But we must leave now. The guards are distracted by the fire. This is our only chance." Behind them, the building groaned, an animal in its death throes. Flames burst through the upper windows, showering sparks into the night. Harwood's voice pierced the chaos. "Stop them. Stop him." Lucien froze. Harwood emerged onto the back porch of the burning building, coat half-burned, hair wild, eyes gleaming with a madness that had finally consumed him. He pointed directly at Lucien. "This is your doing. You are cursed. You brought death into my house." Caleb cursed softly. "We need to run." But Lucien didn't move. Harwood staggered forward, coughing violently, clutching the railing for balance. "I should have sold you sooner. I should have drowned you in the river the moment I saw your face." Eliza stepped protectively in front of Lucien. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "You should never have touched him at all." Harwood's laugh cracked like glass. You helped him. You betrayed your own blood." "I protected a man from you," she answered. Something in Harwood snapped. He reached for his revolver, pulling it from his belt with shaking hands. Jonah lunged forward. "Move." Caleb grabbed Eliza, tugging her back. Harwood aimed. But at that exact moment, the burning roof beam behind him gave way. The porch collapsed. Harwood vanished in a roar of flame and splintering wood. His scream was short, cut off before it fully left his throat. Eliza covered her mouth, trembling. Jonah whispered a prayer. Caleb pulled at Lucien's arm. "We need to go. Now." Lucien didn't look away from the flames. Something deep inside him closed, A chapter ending not with relief but with sorrow. Harwood had owned him, yes. Harwood had hurt him, yes. But Harwood had also represented the final piece of his old life, and now even that was ash. Eliza touched his arm gently. Lucien, you are free from him. But not from danger. Please, come. The softness of her voice, so rare in his world, broke through the numbness. Lucien nodded. They ran. The alley behind the stables was narrow, lined with barrels and crates that cast long shadows in the flickering light. Jonah led the way, his long strides covering ground quickly. Caleb stayed behind Lucien, watching their flank. Eliza remained close enough to touch him but far enough not to hinder his movement. At the alley's end, the river revealed itself, black, churning, reflecting streaks of fire from the burning auction house. A small steamboat waited near the bank, half hidden beneath the overhang of a decaying dock. A lantern hung from its mast, glowing dimly, a prearranged signal. The captain stood on the deck, a tall man with weathered skin and eyes sharp from years of navigating dangerous waters. "You're late," he called softly. Eliza stepped forward. "We had complications." He eyed the group quickly, taking in the soot, the injuries, the fear. "You bringing him?" he asked, nodding toward Lucien. "Yes," she said. "Then get aboard," the captain replied. "River's calm enough for a clean escape, but dawn will ruin everything. You've got minutes." Jonah helped the boys aboard first. Caleb climbed up behind them. Eliza held onto Lucien's hand, not tightly but as if asking permission. He stepped onto the boat. The captain untied the mooring rope and pushed off just as shouts erupted at the mouth of the alley. Several guards had spotted them. "There," a voice yelled. "On the river." Arrows of lamplight jittered across the water. "Down?" Jonah barked. Lucien crouched beside Eliza, the two boys pressed close to him. Caleb shielded them with his broad back. The captain shoved the throttle. The boat lurched forward, slicing into the dark current of the Mississippi. Shouts faded behind them. Sparks from the burning auction house drifted into the night like lost souls. For the first time since he was a child, Lucien felt the air change. He felt the world open. He felt the possibility of life. But the freedom he tasted tonight would come with consequences no one on that boat could yet imagine. Not even him. By dawn, the Mississippi carried the small steamboat far from the burning ruins of Harwood's auction house. The flames had consumed nearly everything: roof beams, platforms, records, even Harwood himself. But the truth had not burned. It had scattered like ash caught on the river wind. Memphis woke to smoke curling above the rooftops and whispers crawling through every tavern, market, and church pew. Some said the fire began with a spilled torch. Others insisted it was sabotage by abolitionists. A few swore they had seen a figure on stage, a man too beautiful to be real, glowing like a ghost in the blaze. But all agreed on one thing. The night had been cursed. And no one wanted to be the first to speak the curse's name aloud: Lucien. By mid-morning, the ruins were surrounded by city officials, bounty hunters, plantation owners, and curious onlookers. The building still smoldered. The air smelled of charred timber and wet ash. Several bodies had already been pulled from the wreckage, some burned beyond recognition, others crushed under fallen beams. Dr. Whitlock identified two of them immediately. "Benson and Caldwell," he said grimly. Both men who attended the viewing. The sheriff spat tobacco onto the dirt. "Any sign of Harwood?" Whitlock hesitated. "Not intact." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd, half relief, half horror. A surviving guard stumbled forward, arm wrapped in blood-soaked cloth. "It was the dark," he said breathlessly. Everything went black. Men were screaming. Someone knocked over the torch. Then the fire, it spread too fast. Faster than anything I've seen. Another guard chimed in, voice trembling. Before it all went wrong, Harwood tried to force that man to speak. The one everyone talked about. The sheriff stiffened. "Lucien?" No one answered directly. They didn't need to. Lucien had become a superstition. A story. A whisper with teeth. The sheriff surveyed the wreckage, jaw tight. "You're telling me a single man caused all this?" "He didn't do anything," the guard insisted. "That's what made it worse." A planter stepped forward, his eyes wild with sleeplessness. "He looked at me," he rasped. "Just looked. And I felt, Lord forgive me, I felt like my soul was being weighed." Another man added, "My brother fainted dead away when he laid eyes on him." Whitlock snapped, "That's nonsense. Fear and suggestion can do strange things, especially in large crowds." "This wasn't fear," the planter insisted. "It was something else." The sheriff raised a hand to silence them. Enough. What matters is finding him. The crowd quieted. Boots shifted. Eyes darted. I want riders posted along the river, the sheriff barked. Search the ferries, the bridges, every wagon that leaves this city. That man is either dead in the rubble or escaping with help. Either way, he is not to vanish. But Lucien was already gone. Far downriver, aboard the smuggler's steamboat, Lucien sat near the bow, staring at the widening sunrise. The air smelled of wet vegetation and soot carried from the city behind them. Jonah kept watch with a rifle in hand. Caleb tended to the two boys, now half asleep from exhaustion. Eliza sat beside Lucien, her fingers still trembling from adrenaline. She watched him quietly. His face was calm, almost serene, as if the fire and chaos had washed something clean inside him. But she noticed the subtle tightness along his jaw, the faint tremble in his breath. You saved those boys, she said softly. Lucien did not answer. She didn't expect him to. Jonah and Caleb owe you their lives. I owe you mine. Still nothing. Then, slowly, he turned his head and looked at her, not with the overwhelming intensity that stunned men into silence, but with something gentler. Recognition. Gratitude. A crack in the armor of silence. Eliza felt warmth rise in her chest. We're safe for now, she whispered. But once Memphis regains its senses, they will hunt you. Lucien lowered his gaze. They always hunt. It was only 3 words, but they struck her like a blow. How long have you lived like this? She asked. Enduring men's obsession? Their jealousy? Their madness? Lucien exhaled slowly. Since I was a child. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. She wiped them away angrily. None of this is your fault. His silence contradicted her. Jonah approached, lowering his rifle. We're nearing the bend. After that, the river forks. Patrols won't expect us to take the shallow route. Caleb nodded. Captain says by sundown tomorrow we'll reach the safe house in Paducah. After that, Ohio. Freedom. The word hovered in the air, unspoken, fragile as a moth wing. Eliza touched Lucien's hand. You will not go back. Not ever. He looked at her, then at Jonah, Caleb, the boys. His gaze softened. For the first time, she saw something almost like hope flicker in his eyes. Not freedom, but the possibility of it. Back in Memphis, the sheriff convened an emergency meeting with city leaders and plantation owners. Fear was thick enough to taste. We have no corpse, the sheriff said, which means Lucien escaped. A planter slammed his fist on the table. Then we send riders. Put up posters. Spread word across Tennessee and Mississippi. And what do we write on those posters? Another asked bitterly. Wanted, a man too beautiful to endure? Several flinched. Whitlock stood from his chair. You are all speaking in superstitions. Men died because the hall was overcrowded and the flames spread rapidly. There is no curse. No unnatural force. But even as he spoke, his voice faltered. Because he remembered the moment he had looked into Lucien's eyes. And how his pulse had skipped. The sheriff cleared his throat. We cannot let the story spiral. The newspapers will print a version we approve. The fire was an accident. Harwood died a hero trying to save his guests. No mention of Lucien. And if people keep talking, a planter asked. Then we silenced them. Fear tightened the room. Men who had bought and sold human lives for years without guilt now trembled because of a single escaped man. A man whose beauty threatened the stability of their entire world. As the smuggler's boat curved around the river bend, Eliza leaned against the railing beside Lucien. You are leaving a city in ruins, she whispered. And the stories they will tell about you, they will not be kind. Lucien watched the water pass beneath them, dark, wide, unknowable. Stories, he murmured, have never been kind. His voice broke slightly on the last word. Eliza closed her eyes, because she knew he was right. And she knew Memphis had only begun its descent into madness. The true legacy of Lucien had not yet been written, but the first chapter was already burning behind them. 30 years later, when the Civil War had come and gone, when Memphis had been rebuilt and burnt again and rebuilt once more, when the slave markets had rotted into silence and the old auction houses were converted into warehouses and grain storage, a group of laborers clearing the ruins behind what had once been Harwood's trading yard unearthed something strange beneath the collapsed foundation of the old stable. It was a metal lockbox. Rust-eaten, mud-swallowed, barely intact. The foreman ordered it pried open, expecting coins or ledgers, something profitable. Instead, they found a burned journal, its pages charred around the edges but miraculously legible in the center. The handwriting inside was delicate, steady, unmistakably female. Eliza Harwood. Her words, preserved by accident and time, formed a history no newspaper, no government, no former slave owner had ever allowed to survive. A history that lived only between those crumbling pages. His name was Lucien. He was the most beautiful man I ever saw and the most hunted. The men who found the journal could not make sense of the writing. They didn't know who Lucien was. They didn't know who Eliza had been. Memphis had swallowed both their names long ago. But some stories do not need recognition to survive. Some stories wait. In the years after Lucien's escape, Memphis officials had done everything in their power to rewrite the night of the fire. Harwood was portrayed as a tragic figure, an honorable traitor who died trying to save wealthy guests from a sudden blaze. The papers published heroic illustrations of him carrying fictional men on his back, his face shaped into noble sorrow. Of Lucien there was no mention at all. Witnesses were pressured to silence. Men who spoke too openly found their businesses audited, their homes searched, their reputations crushed. The city could not allow the truth to spread, that a single man had walked into a room, stood silently, and unraveled it without lifting a hand. A truth that undermined their entire belief system. A truth that frightened them. Rumors, however, have no master. By winter, stories circulated in whispers. Stories of a man whose beauty unmade minds, whose silence drove powerful men to madness. Some said he was a demon. Others swore he was an angel. One merchant claimed Lucien had been a conjurer sent by abolitionists to destroy Southern resolve. A preacher claimed he was a test from God. But none of these rumors reached Lucien himself. He had vanished. He left no trail the Memphis sheriffs or hired bounty hunters could follow. Their dogs lost his scent near the river. Boats reported no unusual passengers. Patrols stopped every wagon leaving the city for weeks, searching for a ghost. But Lucien had already slipped into the soft-breathing safety of the Underground Railroad, the shadowed world where enslaved men and women traded risk for hope. The safe house in Paducah took them in for 3 nights. Lucien barely slept. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw fire, collapsing beams, men reaching toward him with desire that twisted into violence. He saw Harwood's face, contorted with rage, swallowed by flame. On the 4th morning, Jonah and Caleb prepared to travel northward with him. But Lucien stopped at the doorway. "I cannot go yet." Eliza looked up sharply. "Lucien, if you stay they'll find you." He shook his head. "They are searching the roads." "And I?" He looked down at his hands, then at the 2 young boys he had carried from the burning hall. "I cannot leave others behind." Jonah frowned. "You trying to go back?" "No," Lucien said quietly. "But there are safe routes. Houses that need warning. People who need guidance." Eliza understood before the others did. "You want to help others escape." He nodded. Tears burned her eyes. "But you deserve freedom. After everything you've endured." Lucien placed a hand gently over hers. "This is the only freedom that feels true." The boys clung to his legs. Caleb rubbed his face roughly to hide emotion. Jonah cursed softly and walked outside. Eliza stepped closer, her hands trembling. "Will I ever see you again?" Lucien studied her. The woman who had risked everything for him, who had fought him out of fire, who had recognized him as human when others saw a prize. "You will not see me," he whispered, "but you will hear of me." And she did. 4 years afterward, scattered stories drifted southward. None confirmed, none consistent. But all pointing to a single truth. A dark-skinned man, impossibly beautiful, traveling the secret routes northward. Guiding runaways through swamps and forests. Standing watch on cold nights while families rested. Appearing in one town, disappearing in the next. Some claimed he never spoke. Some said he spoke only when necessary. Others swore he glowed whenever moonlight touched his face. Eliza kept all these rumors in a second journal she never shared with anyone. Decades later, when the Civil War ended and slavery was finally abolished, some of the men who escaped through the Ohio trails were interviewed by historians. Many recalled conductors or helpers whose names they never learned. One woman from Kentucky spoke of a silent man who carried her sick son 30 miles without stopping. "He was the most beautiful person I ever saw," she said, her eyes watering at the memory. "But there was sorrow in him deeper than any river. I hope he lived. I hope he found peace." Whether he did or not became one of the many mysteries history never answered. But Eliza believed he survived. Her journals, both the one found in the rubble and the one hidden away, ended with a single line she had written in careful, steady ink. "Beauty is not a curse. The curse is the world that fears it." Many decades later, when historians sifted through Memphis's forgotten records, they found no official mention of Lucien. No ledger entry. No transaction. No obituary. It was as though he never existed. But in the hidden histories, the ones whispered through generations, told by freedmen around firesides, carried by descendants who knew only fragments of truth, Lucien lived on. A man too beautiful for chains. A man too silent for hatred. A man whose very presence broke the world that tried to own him. His face was never confirmed. His fate was never discovered. But the river remembers. The walls remember. And in certain forgotten corners of the South, people still speak of him. The beautiful man who walked through fire and vanished into freedom. What do you think truly happened to Lucien after that night? Did he survive his journey north? Did he keep helping others escape? Or did his beauty, and the curse men projected onto it, shape a different destiny entirely? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more dark historical mysteries like this one, subscribe to the Slave Rebellion. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story, and share this video with someone who loves tales where history and haunting truth intertwine. These stories must be remembered. These voices must be heard.